Welcome to our panel, Spatial Data Across the Enterprise, Tackling Digitalization. My name is Dylan Lockwood. I am the online content editor at Z-Prime. We're going to be talking today about different applications for spatial data and also just the nature of it, gathering it, opportunities, that sort of thing. But before we get into that, I'd like to go down the line and have our panelists introduce ourselves. And Anand, we'll start with you.
Hi, Anand Iyer. I represent Quantum Spatial. We're risk and compliance analytics for utilities, mostly from geospatial data, primarily using remote sensing as a means of data acquisition.
Hello everyone, my name is Matt Piper. I'm the Global Industry Director at Esri. I head up our electric, gas, water, telecommunications and AEC sections.
I'm Lindsay McDougall with Austin Energy Electric Vehicles, and I'm the Electric Vehicle Program Manager. I'm really happy to speak today because I love my energy, but before I loved energy, I loved GIS.
Jake Castleberry, Industry Advisor for the Utilities Industry with SAP.
So how has spatial data been traditionally used in utilities, and how do we see that changing as we move to a more digital grid? Anand, why don't you take that first?
You know, we look at it from our experience with utilities, and it feels like historically the context of spatial data was always considered to be 2D maps and, getting routed to assets and so on and so forth. And certainly in the last few years, the context, the syntax and vocabulary of geospatial expanded so much. It's gone from GIS in the 2D map context to things like LiDAR, 3D modeling and hyperspectral data, spectral data. So that sort of that context and combination of data types, I think to the extent that it has become geospatial, itself is a big change, right? Where people used to do things based on just 2D models, now all of a sudden you have utilities talking about digital twins and 3D modeling and using it for a variety of across the spectrum of everything we talk about here. I think that's a big change, and I think maybe a force that really is here can't really be stopped anymore.
Matt, have you seen any ways it's being used that hasn't traditionally been?
Yeah, so I spent 18 years working in a power company in Australia before I moved to California last year, and GIS traditionally was done by the design team. It's always been, as Anand said, that it's the mapping group that sat over there and they turn paper maps into digital maps and the base network. What we're seeing at the moment is this massive shift in what GIS is being used, and GIS is not just the design anymore. GIS is the enabling or technology for the enterprise and bringing different data sets together that through location as the common integral part. So when you look at utilities now, we're seeing Center of Excellence being spawned up, and at the heart of the Center of Excellence is location. And the location is the thing that's bringing, your imagery data, your drone data, your outage data, your, data from main roads, all these different types of data coming together, and we're seeing utilities answer questions through location. And that's been the biggest shift that we've seen in the market. The problems we're trying to solve are not anymore about how do we design the network. It's how do we engage with customers. It's how do we share our data out in the field. How do we improve safety. How do we answer EV? Where do we connect EVs on the grid?
Yeah, actually, I do want to touch on that, Lindsay. How do you use spatial data in your capacity with EV programs, and where's the potential there for EVs?
So much. So I started my role with Austin Energy in a more customer service facing role, and I would use maps to communicate with my customers primarily. Obviously, charging stations are very locational based. You need to know how to get to them to charge your car, and so I would make specialized maps based on like the property type, so people would know where to go charge. People who would come new to Austin with an EV, they'd want to know where they could live with a charger, so I would make custom maps about apartments with charging stations. Now, when I'm in a more management role, we use it more to locate stations, prioritize station maintenance. We use advanced Tapestry tools that ESRI provides that really segment our population into profiles that we can directly target the customers that are most interested in buying electric vehicles. And then from our population of EV drivers within our service territory, we can identify which of those customers would be best suited with different programs that we have to offer for them. We also map where our customers are in relation to these stations. There's a big what comes first, chicken or egg kind of dilemma with charging stations. Is it the driver or the EV that comes first, or is it the station itself? So when we look at where our customers are and where our stations are, we have to make that decision. Do we put the stations where the customers live, or do we put the stations where they don't live because we assume they charge at home? So these are the kind of decisions that I'm using GIS to help make.
Jay, any thoughts on what makes this data uniquely able to solve modern energy challenges?
Well, the ability to differentiate from a physical address to a very specific location in the world. It's a really critical component where knowing where the physical address is of a meter versus the longe and lat dimensions of where that actual meter exists, even taking that to the distributed energy resources out there. So location awareness of all of the battery storage facilities, the wind charging facilities, solar facilities, all the distributed in there is becoming much more integral to managing a resilient grid for the utilities that are out there. So we're seeing a huge demand in terms of understanding not just what assets do I have, but where those assets live and reside, and even the assets that aren't even there, the utilities anymore. So the need to understand the time series data plus the location specific data and moving that into algorithms to put into predictive maintenance programs and one of those type of things.
So the data is uniquely able to solve a lot of these challenges, but GIS isn't like a super new thing, and yet we're talking about these new domains now. And is there a sense that we're sort of playing catch up with spatial data usage?
Oh, well, without a doubt. I think, 20 years ago, I remember working with SAP when we were talking about doing things like data as a central asset, right? Data management as a central discipline. And to that extent, I think that wave, for a variety of reasons, bypassed the geospatial world to a large extent. Some of it, I think, is also because of what we all said in response to your previous question, where geospatial data was very narrowly confined to just mapping, right? In that context, it had a certain set of uses, but as the definition of geospatial data has grown to include all these other types, particularly three-dimensional data, its relevance to utilities in particular. I mean, about 90% of what I hear, even at this conference or others, is about the problems that arise when utility assets interact with the environment around them, which is inherently a geospatial problem, right? I think it is in that context that now it feels to me that utilities are starting to see geospatial data as a central asset, where centralizing it solves problems at the edges, right? Almost all of data, managing data is about, I collected it, can you use it? And if I don't, you're going to do the same bloody thing again, and that's a problem, right?
Right. Jay, would you say there was like a certain inflection point or specific time when the lights turned on, like, oh, we need to we can use this data in these new ways?
I wouldn't say that there's a specific inflection point. I think that there's been a maturing of that capability ongoing, from taking it from a designing tool, from designing the grid, to now becoming operational tools, to actually becoming tools to support things like environmental clearances. So I think the use cases are evolving, and as the users of the GIS systems interact with all of the other systems that they're interacting with, they're understanding the power of the integrated platform as opposed to just using it to create a map or to create a design of a circuit. They're saying, how do I actually combine that data with my work management processes? How do I combine that with my safety programs? How do I combine that with my financial planning programs? So I think it's just an overall maturing, and depending on the utility and their prioritizations, it's in different areas.
Mm-hmm. So Lindsay, from your perspective, from the utility, are there areas that utilities can apply spatial data that they haven't before, or that they haven't maybe even thought of recently?
Absolutely. So any work group within a utility should hire a geographer, have them come in and look at the data that they have, and they will start telling you, we need to map this, we need to map this, and we will start seeing these trends and patterns, and we can make better decisions to serve our customers. With the EV group, oh, gosh, there's so many maps. I made heat maps, for example, of just kilowatt hour usage at specific stations, and my team had never looked at it that way before. We have these session details tables that I download from our network portal that contains all the data on our charge point network of stations, and it's just a mess of data. It makes no sense. You could perhaps sort it by zip code to try to make some geographic sense of where these stations are located, and then try to sort it by consumption, but it makes no sense to most people until you put it on a map and they see these graduated symbols of circles, and it really makes an impact on people's perception of the program and these expensive assets that we have, the impact on the customers. We just knowing where your customers are is a huge impact to the utility. Any program like solar or demand response, just have a look of where these people live, who are participating, and start drawing reasoning from that. We just simply understanding our range of service. When people plug into our network, how far can these drivers go before they run out of battery? That's useful to know for us to partner with other regions to expand the range across Texas. Powerful visuals for executives. If you want to get your message across, if you want a program to be pushed through or a project, bring a map to your executives. That speaks volumes. Currently, I took over a station maintenance management contract, and geography was not really considered before with that. Like the service crew would look at it to make their routes more efficient and to schedule their logistics for when they would maintain and repair the stations. But on our end, sending them out and spending the money, it hadn't really been looked at. So let's look at where these stations are and combine that with the data of the station downtime, the age of the station, the warranty information, and start looking at where we can spend our money and serve the most people within a geographic area with limited money.
Matt, are there other areas that spatial data can not only help with new programs and new services, but help drive efficiency in places that utilities have traditionally operated?
Yeah, it's interesting to listen to some of the topics we talked about, and like even the last couple of days at this conference, Uber's come up multiple times, and how Uber's been disruptive. You open up the Uber app, and they could have built their business model on any platform, but they could have replicated the taxi service and said when you open up an app, you type in where you want to go, and you could have got a drop-down list and whatever else. You open it up, you see a map straight away, and you see where the drivers are, where you want to go. Everything about that platform is location. You pick up that Lime map, the scooters, disruptive, changing the way we get around. It's exactly the same concept. So it's when you put something spatial or map first, that you're not even aware of what you're doing and the analysis that you're performing when you look at it, but it creates context that you look at data differently. And that's sort of what Lindsay was touching on. What we're seeing in the industry at the moment is like the problems we're trying to solve for utilities. Like I worked at, as I said, at a power company. Every utility starts their meetings with a safety first briefing. But has anyone put GIS as the safety tool that you go out and do? So what we're seeing now is to say, well, where are incidences occurring? Where are our field crews? If we've got guys going out to do work today, and they're going to be up on a pole doing pole maintenance, do we give them an alert to let them know the weather's coming in real time? Do we let them know there's high wind warnings before they go out? There's all these little safety components. Where are the crews right now? Is there road closures when we're going out to do emergency response or we're going out? There's so many different types of data sets that you bring together through location. You don't even know that you're doing it, but you can solve a lot of business problems. So safety is one of the big ones we're working through at the moment, trying to help utilities come together through location. Customers, all the theme today has been on customers. So what we're really seeing is how do we engage better with our customers? The outage maps is a no-brainer, but it's the stuff that Lindsay was talking about where we're pretty excited about understanding our customers better. So there was a big shift from asset-centric, utilities to customer-centric, probably about 5 years ago. I was part of it. I never really understood what that meant for my utility. Like we made all the right, speeches about being customer-centric, customer first, customer choice. Nothing really changed other than the fact that we had new PowerPoint presentations. That was the reality. What we're seeing now is that, through some of the Tapestry data that Lindsay's talking about, we can start bringing in, who was it yesterday that said a customer is defined as a ratepayer or a load? I love that because that's how we looked at it. And the customer was always just an industrial load, a residential load, or a commercial load, and that's the three buckets that you put customers in. We can now understand customers based upon their age, what their energy usage is, how much money they're earning, if a new development's going in, what type of load profile will be expected in that area. So you are actually now, with the AMI data coming in as well, starting to actually understand the customer themselves, how they want to use their data, how they're likely to use the data. Will they buy an EV vehicle?
Yeah, and do they want to hear about EVs from a phone call, email, or flyer in the mail?
Opt in, opt out, all that other stuff. It's self-service portals, it's communication channels. So you get a better insight into your customer through, location as well. So that's a couple of examples that we're seeing, but, safety, customers, and they're pretty common themes throughout every utility.
Yeah, Anand, do we see spatial data kind of encroaching in the space that customer data is? Like, do they work together to create? Or sorry, I guess that's an easy layup question. I should say, what are ways that we're seeing it spatial data encroach on customer programs and help work with customer data to create new programs?
Well, I think between all the panelists, they've touched on a lot of things. I'll just leave you with an example that sits at the intersection of what would be a utility-driven program versus a customer-centric program. One of my colleagues was telling me the other day that he has personal experience of some of the utilities he's worked with that put in about 1 million meters, and 5,000 of them still can't be read because from the whole ROI for the program was built on not having meter readers. But there are still places where just because this spatial data was not part of that design, you still have places where now you have to go out and put those programs in. So those are the kinds of things where I think it has an impact on the customer because a lot of the analytics that come from smart meters do have direct impact on customer experiences, but the groundwork for that was laid further up in the process where spatial data would have had a significant impact on that.
But unfortunately,
it wasn't factored in because again, geospatial data or spatial data was not even a factor in the process, right? Particularly the kinds of geospatial data we're talking about in this model.
Yeah, and I think Lindsay, one thing you were touching on there was that you can use this data to curate content to customers specifically. How are you doing that at Austin Energy?
Sure. So with our Tapestry tool, we've been able to segment our population. You said load or ratepayers. We see 1As, 1Bs, 3Cs corresponding with their segmentation. So we can see where these customers are located and look at other programs that they're participating in, like solar or demand response, and then develop programs specific to that kind of customer and anticipate what kind of programs that customer may want to participate in and have a good idea of our participation levels before we even get started.
Jay, we've talked a lot about the applications of this data and how we can use them to improve customer programs, improve efficiency at the utility itself, and employ some geographers who probably need jobs.
Sure.
How do we go about actually bringing this data together and putting it to use?
So I think that there's two parts of that. So one, bringing the data together, which is extremely important. I mean, if you look at one of the biggest challenges in terms of the utilities are facing is the data that is needed to support the intelligence within the spatial needs of the organization. So I think from a governance standpoint and from essentially getting the data clean, and is basically governing actually how that is. And then I think the second part of it, which is understanding the additional data sources that need to be actually brought into that equation. A lot of the asset data and the data that's required needs to be enriched even more to essentially take advantage of as you move across this maturity curve in terms of from a record-based system to an engagement to actually providing predictive insights into the decision-making processes. Managing the data is going to be a critical component of it, but I think it really does start with having a good governance model associated to managing the data within the enterprise.
What does that governance model look like?
But I think that one is understanding the use cases in terms of the purposes of the use of the data, and then building the organization around that to essentially drive the continuous data quality initiatives that are always going on in this. So it's not something that I think is a steering committee type of structure, but it's more of an operational set of processes that everyone agrees to operate against.
Yeah, we see that in the city of Austin. We have a strong GIS operating board that really dictates the standards of data. So all of us city employees can trust the GIS data that we're using.
Yeah, I think the standards are a critical part. You know, we manage about, on an annual basis, we have 1.3 petabytes of data flowing through our pipeline. You know, it's growing at that rate, and 12 petabytes that we're managing, you know, in storage. I think the standards are a critical part of that because, you know, most people think of governance as databases and technology, right? But I think just the fact that we actually have somebody whose job it is to make sure that this data follows a common standard, whose job it is to make sure that this data is contextualized and that you can see where it is and what it is, and you have language to describe what it is, right? If you treat it purely as a technology problem, you don't have governance. You just have the same data in the same silo enabled by more expensive technology.
I think one of the things to add to that, which is the visualization of when you see that the data that you've put in the system is actually, let's say you've taken a circuit and you realize that part of the circuit is sitting out of your service storage and you can actually see that. That visualization can give you a quicker, more continuous process to actually get the data cleaner. So I do think that the tools and the technology help with the continuous data management processes that are involved there. So if you just do it inside of transactional systems without the GIS layer in there, rows and columns, as opposed to actually being able to see it, I think you have a better way to actually react to any of the data quality issues that might arise as you start to put all these assets in your systems.
I think everyone will agree that there's nothing better for data quality than putting the data in the hands of the people out in the field as near real time as possible. And as they make the edits, it feeds back into an SAP system, it feeds back into your GIS system. But if you can put the data in the hands of the guy out in the field to do the data collection, you know, it drives that continuous data quality improvement. If you're still doing paper at this point you know, if you're a utility and you're still doing data collection on paper, you know, you're not going to improve your data quality at the scale that you need here. The standards or the way that you go to deliver this has to be now something a lot smarter. You know, you have to move to the digital.
Well, with that move to the digital, Matt, are there unique security challenges involved with spatial data, or is it just the same? Or is it very similar to everything else you're going to be dealing with?
Well, I mean, there's always security. You know, the Esri platform has this capability of setting up effectively a portal within your organisation, and we have the system of record, as you see up there. We can design the network at a very, very high fidelity or granularity to feed a modern ADMS, but we also consume data from, you know, SAP, etc. The advantage that we have is that that's one view of the network can then be shared to different parts of your organisation, and during that process in your portal, as you do the configuration, if a none works in customer service or, you know, in that group, I can give him the customer information. But if Lindsay's over, you know, in operations, I don't want her to see what Anand can see, and I can control the flow of information through my portal and all the security profiles. And then if I want to share something to public, you know, like an outage or, you know, what do they want to see, and they can self-serve. It's the same data, just sliced different ways and controlled through, you know, the internal security. And you're not replicating the data. It's the same data. It's just creating different views of it for the different purposes within the organisation. And that's a big step change to the way that we used to do, where your asset management system would be a version of the truth, and your planning system would be another system of record, and your SCADA system is another one, your GIS is a different model. It's now one model and one map, and it's shared, you know, throughout the different organisation and with the public. It's a lot easier to control your data quality and security if it's done in that sort of framework.
Although I do think there are unique security challenges in the sense that we're not dealing with, you know, as much as there are privacy concerns when you're talking about customer data, we're also talking about critical infrastructure, right? And one of the unique challenges that I think utilities have or are starting to face is we all talked about data. One part of the democratization of data is access, right? And one path to that access increasingly is things like the cloud. You don't want your data to be desktop bound. at that point, it is not even data, right? Certainly not usable data. So I think from that comes security challenges in the sense that, you do want to make sure that people who need to have access to data have it. At the same time, to the extent that you're facilitating access, you're across your entire territory, across multiple offices, the security challenge, the concerns are not different, but the rigor and sort of the practice of that rigor are, I think, unique to utilities to a large extent.
Makes sense. Jay, are there any other challenges that utilities are having to work through utilizing this data since they are sort of catching up, as it were?
Again, one area we haven't really hit on that much, which is really the transparency associated with the algorithms that are now being generated. So as we do the process automation and we move into the machine learning, but the ability to actually have better visibility into the predictive algorithms that are going to be running across these systems is an area that I think is full of all sorts of new disciplines that need to be put within the utility operating model.
Excellent. So I want to talk a bit about more about opportunities, but at first I just wanted to, for the sake of discussion, does anyone have any questions about spatial data in terms of how it's being utilized and challenges associated with it? Because we're covered a lot so far. Yes, sir.
A quick one. Hopefully this isn't too specific, but kind of as we're maturing, I guess when utilities typically first started with GIS, it's more of a schematic representation for your operating in the field, things like that. But as we're maturing, we're starting to talk about that digital twin. And it seems like there may be some contention between the model of the physical model of your assets and your network and your infrastructure versus that need to still have that ADMS and schematic and the old world view of things. Do you see a tension there, and how do you resolve it if there is between, without drawing things multiple times and things like that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I understand. So we are seeing that convergence of IT/OT and bringing, so SAP and GIS have sort of been close together for a long time. That backwards look into an asset management, understanding your failures and putting it on a map, your work orders going out. That ADMS question is the forward-looking thing. We are seeing a big push by utilities to move GIS into control rooms. So the switching operator of the network is now wanting to see all this other information at the same time when they're making those decisions. So they want to know, if I'm sending a crew out, what's the network? This concept of having the normal state versus the operating state, we have the planned state, the operating state, there's all this, that's sort of starting to fade away with the capabilities now being able to model the real world into an ADMS system. It's effectively now pushing it out to the guys in the field that there is just the state of the network. And that's the big shift that we're seeing. So there is no more delay of 3 months while we print more paper maps, get them in the trucks, roll out the trucks, and then we roll it back to the normal state after we do switching, etc. There is just the state of the network. And that's that bringing together of your GIS data with your ADMS data. And people just want to know, how is the network operating right now? And that's that OT, IT convergence. And we're seeing it happen now with the modern ADMS and integration to a GIS.
Shay.
Hopefully it's not too specific, but the tendency is to talk about GIS above ground. What are you seeing? What problems do people face with the low ground? I'm speaking specifically for water utilities.
Just talking about
gas.
gas
So,
pipelines.
yeah, gas, but you want to have a go?
You can take it back and I'll follow up with you.
So I do look after our water and gas utilities as well. So modelling underground is, it's not a whole lot different. We have underground for electric as well. So it's always more difficult because you can't see it. So the actual collection of the data, people are very scared to put their data public or available if it's underground, because the call before you dig and all those sort of procedures, your data quality is a little bit harder to validate. But the best way to do it is to take it out in the field and update it while you're there. So taking your design mobile to go out the field and manage it. We are seeing an uptake in water, especially on augmented reality. So we have the capabilities now through GIS to walk along with your iPad, and you'll see this is where the underground pipeline is, and you've got all the asset management information feeding into that to bring that single view. So it's not so much a problem, it's just the data quality, effectively, of people trusting what they're seeing is probably...
I'd say that the complexities associated to underground construction, whether it's water, gas, or electric from the substation standpoint, the complexities are the hardest areas for us to essentially put, I'd say, good business rules and business processes in the systems. That's probably one of the bigger challenges in order to actually make sure we've got that three-dimensional view to be able to actually support it. And that's probably one of the bigger sort of process changes that we have to work with a lot of the utilities, actually how to actually then formulate what is very accessible in sort of a physical world and now into a digital world, into a 3D model.
Yeah.
So.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. So I kind of want to talk a little bit now about sort of what's next. I know we're still sort of playing catch up, but I think there are more opportunities as newer technologies come in for this data to be used. Lindsay, what sort of projects do you see paving the way for new uses of spatial data?
Sure. Well, so Austin Energy, we answer to our city council. We are a department of the city of Austin. And so what I look forward to doing is taking these initiatives that are proposed by city council and really using our services and programs to comply and promote that initiative. There's this Imagine Austin initiative where we're identifying certain corridors where we want to make them higher density and mobility much easier. And so what I've done is taken those same corridors and mapped them out and put our assets along that and try to identify a future state of EV drivers living in these dense corridors and how can we promote charging station installations in those zones. I also see limited funding for our infrastructure. So how do I use GIS and customer data to prioritize station placement to underserved areas or areas that the city council deem priorities?
Does everyone have any other ideas for types of projects that could pave the way for new uses in this data?
I think certainly from our vantage point, one of the things we see quite a bit is, there is a certain amount of catch up, but to the extent that people are starting to see the opportunity in the analytics from geospatial data, there's far more momentum in terms of overcoming, what used to be where we were and what we're trying to get to. So one of the big things that we see is, we've talked about this in the industry for a long time, going from calendar-based programs to this condition-based programs and so on. And I think a lot of the analytics from geospatial data, especially from the combination of multiple types with outage data, et cetera, is certainly spurring a lot of innovation in that area. A lot of utilities talking about that in the context of digital transformation. We certainly see that as one thing that is spurring utilities to talk about those kinds of programs quite a bit.
Well, I think it can't be not talked about, which is natural disasters. Particularly, in the West Coast with, the wildfires and a number of the use cases that are being done with the California utilities and across the West. I think with the hurricane data and the use sets for that in terms of the Southeast and the Eastern corridor from that. But I think a number of things that are happening in the predictive, proactive maintenance space, the use of drones, and you're integrating all of those things in there. You're seeing a lot more activity in terms of the need for combining your geospatial data internal within your organization and integrating it with the fire agencies, the weather agencies, other advocacy groups that are out there.
I also see a lot of applications in marketing, just to get the message out more that these charging stations exist in your neighborhood. They're not the most eye-catching thing, but you can see them. Like, people drive by them and they're like, what is that? And so one simple thing I could do with GIS to get the word out is just do a mile radius search of all the address points of a station and have our marketing group mail out a postcard that says, have you seen this station? It can save you lots of money if you charge here instead of buying a gas car.
Yeah, Matt, what are some opportunities that you're hoping that utilities seize with the use of this data, and why is it augmented reality?
Oh, well, augmented reality is one.
I was just making a joke. Whatever you want.
Picking on the Aussie.
Everything has to be.
We sort of we're having a lot of discussions at the moment, and a lot of companies are forward thinking about how they're going to manage renewables and EVs, and we're really starting to make sure that companies are set up for success. Emergency management is one of the last year was probably the worst in 2018. I lost my house in Australia. We had a 1 in 2,000 year flood, if you can believe that, and it was never going to happen, and we had water to the roof. The fact is that utilities need a platform that they can scale. I used to have a pretty funny saying that we used to solve 2-year-old problems 3 years from now, because by the time you got your business case written, by the time you got your approvals, by the time you got everything else, you had the problem today. It took that long to get the business case up, and then the project begins, and it takes 3 years to get your project to go live. So you're really solving something. By the time you go live, you're 5 years out of date. Yep. So we're really just trying to position. Are you saying no, or are you saying yes?
I'm saying
yes. It's very frustrating, especially if you're the person. We talk about being adaptive and being able to drive utilities forward. If you're that innovative thinker in your organisation and you're trying to do this, it's sometimes like banging your head against a wall. The way we're positioning ourselves at the moment is you need to be having a conversation with your executives to understand your geospatial infrastructure or your location strategy. If you don't have a location strategy for how you manage all these data sets on imagery, on drones, on 3D, on failures, on condition monitoring, and all these other data sets you're getting back to visualize it and put it out in the guys, EV vehicles, you really aren't set up to scale and be agile to solve problems very quickly. And as bad as an emergency is, like wildfires or hurricanes, etc., sometimes that's exactly what's required for your utility to say, we cannot adjust quick enough to do this, and all the bureaucracy and red tape goes away, and then you can just get stuff done. And it's incredible how quickly you can scale up and deliver a solution when you build it on something that's map-based. So that's probably the key message for me for utilities at the moment is you really need to be thinking, a location strategy or geospatial infrastructure at the moment, so you can adapt and scale when needed.
I mean, the biggest problem we see out there is solving for complexity. So the sprawling complexity that's happening between the digitization of assets, the decentralization of all of the grid infrastructure that's happening, the fragmented IT landscapes that are out there. The real big challenge out there is to actually have a way to simplify that infrastructure from a technology perspective is probably one of the biggest things that we've said. And so how do you actually have these platforms that can scale and be very agile and adaptive and be very innovative? And the crisis management component is a great example of how utilities are rallying to actually organize around solving these things. But ultimately, I think it's coming down to how do you address the sprawling complexity that's growing very rapidly within the environment.
I like your idea of a location plan. I could see a great role in a utility is a location liaison who just goes from work unit to work unit to have a look at what locational data is out there and how they can improve it. And I know a few years ago, a buzzword at this very conference was eliminating silos. And I could see that being a good role for just breaking down those silos. And because we're all mapping stuff in individual groups, and how do we bring that together and maybe have some standards that aren't so high up as the operating board, but lower down to facilitate that.
I'm frequently, and I should not be surprised by how much data you find on desktops and drives even today. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I get on people, put that on your share drive. What are you doing?
Well, I mean, if anyone out there needs a job, it sounds like Austin Energy needs a liaison. We have a question in the audience.
Both of you from Esri and SAP mentioned scalability and the importance in your platforms of setting your customers up for success. Talk to me a little bit about how you're addressing that and for the whole panel. I see in the utilities a challenge with some of our fabulous technology partners over the years, where we have gone to them for point solutions. We have this problem to solve. We'll spend lots of money putting this in place to solve this problem. But our problems are changing so quickly that our platforms need to be more flexible and scalable. You both mentioned it, but how are you advantage in your company figuring out how to address that?
So I'll take a crack at it. So there's probably 3 platforms that we recognize that we need to address. The enterprise platform and the ability to actually have that enterprise platform, traditionally known as your ERP or those type of things, stay very pristine and actually be able to move at its own track. We're also seeing that we need systems of innovation that out there that you can innovate and actually deploy these solutions very rapidly in the business without having to disrupt the enterprise systems. And so then the idea is then this idea of an integrated platform. So how do you actually then connect them? So the ability to have this decoupled architecture that is tightly integrated, that actually works together, is really, from an SAP's perspective, what we're working towards. So that you can have ways to innovate with the business, faster, more agile, deploy solutions quicker without having to deal with this massive technology upgrade that these enterprise systems have to progress. So investments in the cloud and being able to do a lot of the cloud technology deployments, and that's a major area of emphasis in terms of investment for ourselves as well.
I've implemented some mapping solutions to prepare our customers for success. When I first started working for Austin Energy, we had a little over 1,000 EV drivers in our service territory, and now we have over 7,000. And I would answer a lot of calls, just where can I charge my car? There's an app from the manufacturer of these charging stations that the customer can use, but it's not, it doesn't give the level of detail that our customers want. And as our population of EV drivers increased, I knew I couldn't just keep answering these emails. So I published a map with rows of data that showed the customer usage category of the charging station, and we use Socrata data, and it's a data.gov public map service that works with governmental organizations to provide free maps for customers. And it actually has like map customization tools, so the customer can filter just public stations or just apartment stations or just shopping mall stations and have a map display custom for them, and they can print it out. And we update that, and that handles a lot of our customer inquiries.
So just to extend on what Jay said, so we have a new data model which is called the Utility Network, which was released last year. And it's entirely based upon service-orientated architecture. So SAP is one of our strategic alliance partners, but in effect, there's no more integration at the point-to-point. Like your network effectively is held together by whatever your oldest customized configured system is that sits there, has 140 spaghetti diagram integration points. You can't move away until that has to go away. So what we have now is effectively service-oriented architecture, which just using REST endpoints, we can communicate. We have partners that extend and actually hold products like SAP and our GIS together and keep them in sync. So the end user doesn't actually understand whether they're not updating a map or they're updating SAP. It is a solution that they just go out and these two systems stay in sync. And it's that sort of relationships and integration that just lets you scale to the point of what you're saying is you don't have to start a project, wait 6 months and then deliver it. You want a solution, you effectively scale up your map and you push it out and you're live in a couple of days. It's that simple now.
Yeah, if I may add, I think we're clearly not SAP or Esri, but I think for us it begins with the recognition that no one organization is going to solve any reasonable size problem in a practical way. So it begins with that recognition, SOA and REST APIs and so on and so forth are important, but it's also important to recognize that other people will have good ideas that have legitimate value.
Yep.
So for example, we're doing predictive analytics on modeling tree failures, and we're perfectly open to the idea there's going to be some bright spark at some university that's going to come up with wind modeling scenarios that inform some of the other risk models. And if you don't open yourself to that possibility that data is just as valuable as the stuff you do, then I think you don't even start to think about all these other things, right? So a lot of it begins with the mindset that it is a collaborative world and one size does not fit all, and one solution doesn't solve all problems either.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for your questions. We've reached time. I've been told to let everyone know that you should head to the Moody Theater as soon as you can. We've got a special speaker coming up in about 10 minutes. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good job, guys.